to the public meeting, and I would like to ask us to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Start with some introductions. Good evening. I'm Diane McBride. I'm the board president. To my right.
Good evening. Jennifer Laird, board member.
Good evening, everyone. Karen Flanagan, school district clerk.
Good evening, everyone. Anne-Marie Straczynski, she is not feeling well, so she's Zooming from home tonight.
Good evening, Nelena Selma, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Hi, Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations.
Good evening, Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction.
Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources and School Accountability.
Hello, James O'Brien, board member.
Good evening, Nikki LaPlaca, board member.
George Day Marteau, attorney for the district.
Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
Thank you. Next up is agenda review, and there is a change to this evening's agenda. Listed under item, 15, which would be the district policies, regulations, and exhibits. That is being withdrawn from our agenda for the evening. We will put it on a later agenda. This is in part because of a couple of our members not being here with us this evening. We want to include everyone. Any announcements? All right, there being none, this will bring us to, well, it would be the student report from our student representatives, but they're not here with us this evening. So it brings us to a public forum. This is where the audience members may address the board regarding items of interest that are not on the agenda. If you wish to speak regarding an item on the agenda, please raise your hand when we get to that item under discussion. Because we have a very full meeting again this evening, we're going to ask folks to try and keep it to our 3 minutes, please. And so I do have 2 cards up here with me. We'll start with those. And the first card I have is Mr. David Stevenson. Please come to the microphone. Whoever comes up to speak, state your name and address for the record, please. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Stevenson. I represent RH Care, Rush-Henrietta Citizens for Accountability and Reform in Education. Tonight we're advocating for opening school 5 days a week, and we encourage the school board and the superintendent to seriously consider opening schools 5 days a week. We encourage the school board and the superintendent to find a way. I know that the New York State regulations or guidelines have come down recently, and they're not as good as the national CDC guidelines. You may want to choose to follow the CDC guidelines rather than the New York State guidelines. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. The next postcard I have is Rachel Sherman, and since we're going to talk about the budget, but we will be talking about that later in the evening, so would you like to wait till then? All right, thank you. Are there any other individuals that would like to speak this evening? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda items for routine matters. This is the February Treasurer's Report, Cooperative Art Supplies, change orders, the revised selection committee, and scholarship award for the Raymond Delaney Arts Alive Award. And some approvals of an impartial hearing officer, calendar revision, our reorganizational meeting date, CPSC and CSE recommendations. And item I believe, I did not see it show up the minutes from the last meeting. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Yes. So we will have those, item I, the minutes, the approval of those minutes at the next meeting. I'll take a motion to approve all those, please. Mrs. LaPlaca. Mr. O'Brien. All right. Any questions? I'll try to remember that Mrs. Straczynski is at the end. It's hard when there's not a body there. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries 5-0. I apologize, I did not mention that Ms. Abdullah will not be here with us this evening. She is with her family this evening. This brings us to personnel actions, and we're going to take them one at a time, seeing they're separate actions. The first is pertaining to the approval of normal personnel actions. I'll take a motion. Mrs. Laird, Mrs. LaPlaca, second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Item B, approval to an employment extension tenure waiver for administrator. And I have Ms. LaPlaca, Mrs. Laird. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Action pertaining to the approval of an employment extension for a probationary school psychologist. I'll take a motion. Mr. O'Brien, Mrs. Laird. She's taking notes. I see her nodding. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Action pertaining to the approval of the adjustment of benefits for certain exempt persons. Take a motion. Ms. LaPlaca,
Jennifer.
Mrs. Laird. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. This will bring us to our workshop on the budget development. As we begin our workshops this evening, I would like to remind everyone of our process. The presenter will share the workshop information. The board will then have its dialogue and ask questions. Once the board is finished, the board will then entertain questions and comments from the floor. Any questions or comments are to be directed to the board rather than to individual staff members. All right, so that's how that process usually works. Just wanted to remind folks because it's been a while since we've had a workshop. So I'm going to turn it over to the superintendent.
Okay, as we continue the conversation around budget, there are several items that we'll be asking you to take action on this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Andy Whitmore to walk us through the detail related to each of these items.
All right, thank you. This has been a very strange budget year. We started off the year with potential 20% cut in state aid. It could have cost the district up to $10 million. Fast forward, that those cuts have not been realized, and we put together a budget based upon the governor's recommended budget, which over the last few years has been very close to what the final budget has been. But this year, the dynamics were a little bit different, given the state received a significant amount of federal stimulus funding and some of the dynamics in Albany. So what we have been presenting to the board over the last month, the superintendent's recommended budget, are items A, B, and C in your work papers, so we can certainly move forward and approve that. It's a sound, solid budget. But what we found out last week when the state budget got finalized, we were given about $4.1 million of additional state aid. So we have a proposed alternative budget for the board to consider as well, which are items D, E, and F. And so what happened, we received $4.1 million of additional state aid. There was a $2.9 million increase in our foundation aid. So over the last couple of years, our foundation aid, which is a little bit over half of our total aid, and it's to be used for general purposes, last couple of years, the governor has kept it flat, and under his proposal, we were $11 million less than what the formula would provide us. So the final budget gave us an additional $2.9 million in federal aid. There were two other things that happened. One is the governor's proposal to use the December stimulus money. We were allocated $5.2 million. He included that in our budget, but then he included a reduction in state aid of $5.2 million. That has been taken out of the picture. Both the December stimulus money and the March stimulus money, the state has now moved out of the general fund. So you will not see that reflected in the general fund. It's being moved to our special aid fund. It's because it's federal funding, it's being treated as a grant, and that money, the state is expecting us to spread over a 2.5-year period. It expires in September of '24. So we are not including any of that money in the general fund budget, but we are recommending or suggesting an alternative budget that includes the $4.1 million of state aid. So $2.9 million of that was the increased foundation aid, and then there was a restoration of our expense reimbursement aid. There's a number of expense aids that we get for Boces spending, transportation spending, where there's a formula, we get a % of that given back to us the following year. The governor had proposed reducing that aid. That has been restored. That's another $1.2 million. So our recommendation for the board to consider, and unfortunately there's not time to consider this over numerous board meetings because our property tax report card with our final budget numbers does need to be submitted to the state before the next board meeting, as well as we have to include a budget notice in the newsletter, and that goes to print. The printers get it very early next week. So, you know, I don't like surprising the board like this, but there are a couple of options. So the second option, to use that $4.1 million, what we would recommend, use $2 million of that to reduce the tax levy, which would provide a 0% tax rate increase for our taxpayers. So even though our levy will still be going up a little bit, 2% rather than 4.5%, that 2% is driven by the new RG&E project, which drives about $2 million of additional tax dollars to us. But there won't be any increase in the tax rate to our homeowners. So that's one recommendation. Another is to reduce our reserve usage in the budget. As you know, reserves are like savings account. If you use them for recurring expenses, when you run out of your savings account, you have a bigger gap. So our recommendation is to eliminate our reserve usage by $600,000 and then use the remaining $1.5 million to increase our expenditure budget. So the bulk of that, $1 million, would be used for additional academic support intervention services for our students throughout the school year, as well as enhanced extended school year, which is our summer school for our special ed students. There's a lot more in need this year because of the pandemic closed down. So we would recommend adding $1 million for support programs. We can also use some of it for social emotional support. So we're recommending adding $150,000 to our contractual expenses for needs that we might have. Some of that might be outside agencies for social emotional support for our students, for needs yet to be identified, but potentially there. $300,000 additional to our facilities to enable ongoing cleaning and the disinfecting supplies and things like that, and $50,000 for incremental equipment so we can purchase some of our cleaning equipment that we use to support the enhanced cleaning and disinfecting that we've been doing all this year. So that would increase the expenditure budget by $1.5 million. So it's really up to the board's discretion whether to take option A, which is the superintendent's recommended budget from last time, and adopt that, or adopt the new alternative budget. So any questions, comments regarding that? Yes.
So this budget does not include the $5 million in federal stimulus. How do we go about using, like, do we create another budget for that amount, or how do we do that, since it's not in this budget?
Excellent question. And yes, that remains to be seen. What happens is the federal government, when they allocate money, they flow it through the state. So a year ago, the first stimulus CARES package, it took the state a year to develop the guidelines of how we could spend it, and we have to then, Dr. McHugh develops a budget recommendation for the state, they have to approve it. So it took a year to go through that process. We suspect it'll take a minimum of 6 months for this extra money to be, the guidelines to be issued and for us to determine how to use it. And it is to be spread over multiple years. The state does not want it all spent in 1 year. Once it's gone, it's gone. So the board will, once we receive guidelines, we'll review options with the board about alternatives of how it could be used. So that'll be a future budget development meeting.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think the superintendent's recommendation would be the new revised budget, D, E, and F. Is the board willing to consider that? And do you need any additional explanation?
Anybody need any other explanation, any
I'm sorry,
comments?
I can't hear you.
Sorry. And it's funny. Anybody have any additional comments, questions regarding that? Concerns? No? All right. I do have someone who wants to comment on the budget, so I'm going to allow that before we take our vote on what we want to do. So I'm going to have Mrs. Sherman come up. Again, we're going to ask you to keep your...
I did have printed comments for the board.
That would be great. Yep.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, Board of Education. 4.1 new dollars. There's but one question about it. You know, this is really disappointing. I would really like to see you engage more with the budget process and with the dollars that are in front of you. As you know, I'm Rachel Sherman. I'm a candidate for school board and the mother of 3 children in the district. I was a volunteer on the superintendent's budget advisory council, and so my prepared remarks are about the base budget that was proposed. I took notes about what Andy just said, but didn't revise my comments on that basis, but if I may try to along the way. Mr. Wright and Mr. Whitmore came into the BAC with numbers in December, and those did not change meaningfully based on input from anyone in the group. Here are some of the questions that I have about the process, and I would encourage you board members to ask them of Mr. Wright. As a part of the budget development process, what student groups did he go visit? What staff groups did he go visit? What community or parent groups did he go visit? DPAC, PTOs, sports boosters, RAMPA? If he went to talk to any of these stakeholders to ask what they would like to see in the budget, what were their ideas? Did he make any changes based on their ideas? If the answer to these first 4 questions is none, or that he only took input from his cabinet and directors, then I ask you to consider, is this budget before you really reflective of the best ideas of our community to meet the significant challenges ahead? Other important questions. Why is Mr. Wright proposing a budget from which he already plans to make strategic cuts? How is that transparent to the community that will be voting on a certain level of programs and services? Why isn't the director of music position being restored? Is it too late to help the music program recover? There's $4.1 million more dollars. Maybe somebody wants to ask about the director of music. Why is he proposing a budget reflecting a paper deficit of $4.2 million and only using $700,000 of our reserves towards this paper deficit when we have $5.4 million in reserves available to make up that deficit? When in fact there was a $14 million surplus from last year that went into various funds. Why is he asking taxpayers to pay $6.2 million that will just be saved in capital reserves for the future, when the Capital Projects Fund already has $29 million as of June 2020, and the current year's budget is adding more money, $6.2 million, to capital reserves? Why is he allowing the falling pilot payment by Marketplace Mall, a reduction of only $400,000 in the budget, to take on outsized prominence when the growing energy sector compensates for this reduction by more than 5 times, with the RG&E substation set to pay $2.2 million a year in new taxes? Why is he not proposing improvements to facilities that would be a shot in the arm to the struggling sports, music, and arts program? We have the numbers at Rampa meeting yesterday were very sad. There've been so much fall off in students engaging in the music program. We have tens of millions in capital reserve funds that can be tapped. When will Mr. Wright address some of the capital improvement issues that I hear from the community, like artificial turf, field lights, having more band instruments? Why is he planning to move $3 million from the appropriated fund balance of this year's budget into next year's budget? Why isn't that misleading to the community, reflecting a pattern in this district going back at least a decade of over-budgeting on expenses while under-budgeting on revenues? Why doesn't this pattern set up the false impression that the district is struggling when in fact the district seems to have had budget surpluses for most, if not nearly all, of the last 10 years? Since I decided to run for school board, I've been going door to door talking to people who've lost jobs, had to reduce hours to watch or educate their children, or are on a fixed income, and or now have to pay substantially more in food and energy costs. Answering these questions that I've posed would at least acknowledge the community's experiences and concerns, and perhaps lead to a more transparent budget that more closely reflects the real level of programs and services being provided. This could inspire more confidence by our community that this board is not just looking at how much it can take from the community in tax dollars, but is doing the important work of ensuring the administration is accountable in how it develops its plan and how it actually spends those tax dollars. I'd really be interested in the answers to these questions. You are all invited to contact me. I'm happy to talk anytime. You should have my phone number and my email address, and I can be reached through my campaign website, electrachelsherman.com. Thank you, and I hope that you'll have more robust discussion about the options in front of you tonight.
Thank you. Sorry, I saw you standing and I was like, oh, do you have a question? But now I understand. I'm sorry. All right. Is there any more conversation that folks would, go ahead.
If I may interject, what we're asking you to decide tonight is whether to accept the original budget proposal, or if you would consider an amended budget proposal, which would essentially reduce the levy, but also keep the tax rate flat, responding to not only, I want to point out, some of the sentiment that came out of budget advisory from certain members, but also trying to recognize that we do have several community members who are in need, as Ms. Sherman pointed out. We want to be responsive to that. And these are, as Andy mentioned, very unique circumstances that we find ourselves in. The structural deficit that we face every single year is real. And if we're not frugal, if we don't build our reserves, if we don't budget conservatively, then that's going to become a problem for us down the line. The reason it hasn't been a problem, the reason that it isn't right now, is because we do things the way that we do. And the district has a long history of budgeting in that manner. But having said that, regardless of what happened with the federal stimulus package, regardless of what happens with the aid, this was a good budget year for us. Because we're in a community where we have experienced some growth. We had some fortuitous bounces, if you will. But again, it's also because of the process that we use and the philosophy that we have here in this district about the way that we budget. So we do need you to make a decision tonight about the direction that you want us to take. But like I said, we are very confident in terms of our ability to reopen with this budget and adequately support students, maintain our facilities, respond to whatever happens with remote learning, and to implement any health and safety measures which will present themselves this fall. And I will point out this, whether you decide to reduce the tax rate or not, Rush-Henrietta has the lowest tax rate in the entire county at 1.7%. So whatever you decide to do tonight, the community is still in very good shape. But given these unique set of circumstances, we are proposing a consideration of a reduction in the levy and ultimately a reduction in the tax rate itself.
Right. Some of the things that were brought up are things that are on our forefront that we've had to put aside basically because of the pandemic and because of our needing to work with the town on a couple issues like with the Good Shepherd building. So they are not lost. They are just temporarily on hold at this moment. Things that we'll be looking at for the future development of our grounds and our buildings and our programs. So having said that, we need to make a decision about whether or not we accept A, B, or C in the budget process, or D, E, F, which is the alternative that has been directed towards us. So let's have some conversation about which way folks would like to go. Does anybody want to keep the original, or would we prefer to go to the alternative, which keeps that tax rate flat, helps our community with not spiking taxes?
I like the flat.
The flat.
I'm all for the alternative as well.
Okay. Mr. O'Brien, any?
Tell me more about the, what was that figure, Andy, for special education? $1 million, was that what I heard? There was talk about increased resources into special education.
Yeah, we've added $1 million, not necessarily for special education, that's part of it,
Yeah.
but also for general academic intervention services. So it would be used throughout the school year, both for gen ed students, but also the enhanced summer program
Right,
for
yes.
special ed students.
My apologies, I misspoke.
Anne Marie said that she would like the revised budget as well.
Okay. All right. Any more conversation? I do have a hand out there. All right. You may come to the microphone. State your name, please.
Sheila Buck, music teacher, Sherman Elementary School. I reside at 2071 Harris Road, Penfield, New York, 14526. I would just like to say that the decision to remove the Director of Music and Visual Arts was made last year without a lot of discussion and without a lot of thought about what it would do to the music program. I know I spoke to some board members individually where they said things like, well, we know the staff will carry on. Well, it's still going to be a priority. Well, we'll still do that. Now you are faced with the opportunity to make whole an instructional area that is a source of tremendous pride to this district. And I would implore this board to consider the fact that this is one of the crown jewels of the Rush-Henrietta School District. It will not be a crown jewel without a dedicated director. It's one of the reasons many of your esteemed faculty and the music faculty came to Rush-Henrietta, because of the focus of a director. And without that, the program will surely dwindle. The director who is in charge of it is a fine person, an amazing administrator, and a tremendous person who I have gotten to know this year, and has a lot on his plate. And when you are now faced with the fact that you are keeping administrators who are not instructional focused, and you have removed the focus on an instructional area, I think it is incumbent upon this board, and I plead with you to please consider restoring that position. Thank you.
Just taking a moment to shift. With a little back problem. All right. Does anybody want to have conversation about any of these topics, or I'm personally don't want to just drop something new into a budget at this point. I would rather have further conversation and discussion about it, and if it's something that we needed to do to consider it for next year's budget. But I'm not an advocate of just dropping a position into a budget without having some thoughtful conversation around that, because it's not something that you have to sustain that salary. I do hear the concerns. I have heard it from parents as well. So it may be a conversation we need to come back to. But that's just my thought. It's hard to drop, I think, a new position in something we're getting ready to go out to the community with, unless others think differently.
The money we're getting, again, it's for non-reoccurring expenses, correct, Mr.?
The 4 million is an increase in state aid, so in theory, that should be recurring as long as the state can continue. There was a huge increase in the state budget this year, so it's dependent upon the state finances being able to sustain that over the long term. But if it can, that is a recurring revenue source. But given the whole economic uncertainty and the pandemic and these other things, I would be a bit reluctant to build in long-term recurring expenses until things have shaken out and we have a better sense of where the economy will be long-term. But this was not the stimulus money, which is definitely one shot. This was a bump up in our state aid, but as you've seen, and it's happened a couple of times in the last decade, if times get tough, education aid gets cut abruptly. And so our hope is this is ongoing, sustainable, but I'd be reluctant to build a significant amount of expense and counting on it until the economy has time to heal and we see how long-term the state does.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. So it brings us to, do we want to have a vote then on the D, E, and F, or everybody's ready to make a decision?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So then we would need to have a motion for item D, action pertaining to the adoption of the alternate 21-22 revenue and expenditure budget. Mrs. LaPlaca, second. Mrs. Laird, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Anne Marie said she's for too.
Okay, thank you. It's very hard to hear her. That brings us then action, item E, action pertaining to the acceptance of the alternative property tax report. Can I just move right to that, Mr. Whitmore? We're okay with that?
Yes, this reflects the new budget that you've adopted. So it does increase the budget. It'll be a 4.2% increase, but the tax levy will only be a 2% increase, which is driven by the new money from RG&E. The tax rate for our homeowners will be flat.
Okay. I'll take a motion. All right, Mrs. Laird, and second by Mrs. LaPlaca. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Then this would bring us to the action pertaining to the acceptance to the alternative budget notice. And I'll take a motion for that. Mr. O'Brien, okay. Mrs. Laird. All right, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mrs. Spasinski's good with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll just check. Yep.
All right, this brings us to item 11, our community referendum propositions.
Diane, before we move on, can we make sure we add it to our agenda at a later date to talk about the music program?
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Can we put it on a later date to talk about the music program and the director position and what effect it has had on?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
And it'll come up in our recap. All right, community referendum propositions. We have to take action pertaining to the adoption of the propositions. The first one being the budget proposition, and the second one, the bus expenditures. And they were outlined for us already. And I would take a motion, Mrs. Laird. And a second. Mrs. LaPlaca. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. That brings us to 11B, action pertaining to the adoption. Oh, I did the wrong one. My apologies. Oh. We wanted to do B for the alternative propositions. My apologies. I just kind of followed along. So can we say that is null and void for Proposition A, and we really wanted to vote on action pertaining to the alternative propositions for the community referendum? I will take that motion now.
Jennifer.
Jennifer and Nikki, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. This brings us to our workshop on community referendum communication. And it's been outlined for us, our plan. And I don't know who wants to speak to that. Anybody have? All right, so it's listed there for your internal and external places that we're going to be publicizing it. There will be posters in all the buildings, the town halls, for those that get out. Our district Facebook page, the community newsletter, and 6-day budget notice will be coming out in May. That's the item that Andy was speaking to, that will be going to the printer next week, early next week, in order for it to be mailed. We have different media opportunities. We had our budget forum last week. We just adopted our budget today. We'll have a public hearing on May 4th, and then our budget vote on the 18th. And then all the other electronic pieces, website, Facebook page, local TV stations, Monroe County School Boards, New York State School Board Association will also have a public service announcement. Each of us is a liaison to different groups, to the different PTO meetings. So we'll be going out to those as well. And outdoor-wise, there'll be the different billboards that we usually put, the sandwich boards that we put outside for the budget vote on that day. A reminder for everybody to make sure that we're sharing with folks the change of location. All right. Anything that needs to be added to that communication plan. All right. We do not have the draft budget newsletter this evening, just because it's still being worked on with all the changes from we just made tonight, so we will see that in the very near future.
Later this week.
Okay, later this week. So we'll probably get an electronic copy of that, and then if you have anything that you think needs to be added, we need to get it to whom and by what time. Would it be to you, Karen, any changes we see in the budget newsletter?
It might go back to Travis.
Travis, okay. All right, ASAP. I'm going to finish this first. All right. And our presentation schedule, some of us have already started presenting, just because the way the PTOs are meeting. Some of them are not having meetings before the budget votes, so a couple of us are doing them already. Yes, Mrs. LaPlaca.
I have a question. Since some of us have already given our presentations, how are we disseminating the new information to them about the updated budget?
We'll have to think about that. My thought would be to maybe send an update electronically, and then all of the other budget documents that go out would all be updated at that point.
Yeah, we'll have to get it to the principals, so
Yeah, I was just going to say, could we give it to the principals, like I already did it through the high school? Maybe just get it to Tim, and then he can put it in the newsletter,
okay.
His e-news, yeah.
his e-news.
Yep.
In some cases, there may still be another PTO meeting before the budget vote. Like, for instance, Volmer's PTO presentation was last week. I think that there is another Volmer PTO meeting
Okay.
before the budget vote where,
All right.
an amended presentation could be given, I think.
All right.
Yeah, and we'll also be presenting at DPAC in May as well. So we'll get it to the
Okay.
parents that way.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to stop right here. Mrs. Sherman.
So I have a suggestion about the budget newsletter. As I'm walking around town talking to neighbors about the school district, I'm hearing from families comments that they think the district has no money, the district is broke. One soccer family told me that these lights that they wheel out to night games, which are run on some kind of portable engine, they're so loud that you can't hear the whistles on the field. And when her daughter, who's almost 16, said, boy, I wish this district would finally get lights on soccer fields, the 15-year-old said, Mom, they have no money. They're so broke. So, this message, I think, is hurting the people that you're trying to help. People think that they can't advocate for the things that would really improve their learning and extracurricular environment. I'm not here saying, go get lights on fields, but I am saying you have tens of millions of dollars in capital improvement funds that people seem to not know about. So my suggestion for the budget newsletter for a really open and transparent process would be to include the fund reserve balances in that letter. Because I think if people knew that there was so much money in fund reserves, that they wouldn't be so shy about asking for a restoration of the music director, as we heard people talk about at Rampa last night. They wouldn't be so shy about asking for lights, the things that would make some difference. The money is sitting there. People should have the opportunity to advocate for what they want or what they need to make their school experiences better. So that's my suggestion about the budget newsletter. Please consider it.
All right. And then last document in there is it will no longer be called the superintendent's recommended budget. It'll be the board's. Someday we won't have these masks and we won't have to. So the last document says superintendent's recommended budget, but as of tonight, it'll be our recommended budget. And this is the document that we'll be able to utilize with some updates as we go to our different meetings, etc. So that's the last item under the communication plan. I just really have to say this because it's bothering me. One of the things with our capital reserve fund that we've been putting money aside for, Mrs. Sherman, is the fact that we purchased Good Shepherd and we are trying to save money in order to be able to update our athletic fields and consider lights in different areas. So they have advocated, they know that we can't right now because of where we are with the pandemic and what we have to do with the town as far as some of the buildings that's going to be part of our discussion. That is one of the things that we're coming back to is what do we do with that property? What do we do with our fields? What do we do with those lights? So I just had to say that this evening. Normally we don't dialogue in this way, but I needed to say that to you. All right, we'll move on now to the Monroe Boces annual election and budget vote. All right, so we have several different individuals that are up for election to represent their component school district on the Monroe Boces. We had the opportunity to view their resumes, and so we'll take them one at a time. We have an action pertaining to the approval for Robert Dickinson from the West Arundequite Central School District for the term which will begin July 1st, 21 to June 30th, 24. Any discussion about Mr. Dixon?
No.
Okay. So I'll take a motion to approve. And Mrs. LaPaca and Mr. O'Brien. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next one is the resolution to elect Maureen Up, who is a resident of the Fairport Central School District, to represent them on the Monroe Boces 1. And I will take a motion. Mrs. Laird and Mrs. LaPlaca. Any discussion on Maureen? These are all fine representatives of their community. A few of them have already been representing. All right. The next one would be the approval for Mr. Tom Nespeka of the Webster Central School District to represent Monroe Boces 1. I'll take a motion. Mrs. LaPaca. All right. Mr. O'Brien. All right. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The next one would be Nancy Summel, resident of East Arundequite, to represent on the Monroe Boces 1. I'll take a motion. Okay, Mrs. LaPlaca, Mr. O'Brien. Any discussion on Nancy? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Next up is Mark Kavanovich. I know his name. He is with the Brighton Central School District, and he was shifting to Monroe 1 Boces. I'll take a motion to approve. Mr. O'Brien?
Pleasure.
Mrs. LaPlaca? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. This is, the next one, item F, is the action to the approval of the Board of Education for the proposed Monroe Boces administrative budget in the amount of $5,662,083 for the 21-22 fiscal year. Remember, this is all the component districts combining into their budget. I will take a motion to approve. Mrs. LaPaca?
Me.
Second. Mr. O'Brien, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. This brings us to our workshop on Good Shepherd.
Okay. At our next meeting, we're going to be talking a little bit more about future use related to Good Shepherd. As you know, we initially purchased that property to improve access to the high school in the athletic complex, and also to provide additional learning spaces for our early childhood programs and our adult education program. So it presents us with an opportunity to revisit the conversation that we were having prior to the pandemic around potentially putting in turf and some enhancements to the fields and that area around the high school, but then also to look at what we want to do with some of our programs going forward. That's a conversation that we're going to have at our next meeting. Tonight, though, is really about the potential sale of parcels on that property. As you know, there's an old farmhouse that is located on the corner of that property, and a church that means a whole lot to the community as well. Initially, we were considering raising the farmhouse because it's difficult to get a C of O given the confines the school districts are under in terms of requirements for being able to utilize that space. And we initially talked about the possibility of renovating the church as sort of an additional space, but the renovation would have been very, very costly for the school district. So we have been in talks with the town about the potential sale of those parcels. That way, the community and our kids would still potentially benefit from those spaces, but the district, as I said, really never had a use for the farmhouse, but would avoid the cost of renovating the church. But as I said, the community would still benefit from that space. So what we're asking for you to do tonight is, we want to walk you through some of the details related to the potential sale of the property. We're looking for you to take action related to, I guess we're looking for you to consider approval of this action in concept. And if you are in favor of it, then we would come back to you at our next meeting and ask you to consider approving the final sale of those parcels. So that's a little bit of context for you. I'm going to ask Andy to fill in some of the financial details.
Yeah, and you've pretty much given the summary of what my overview is. The board, when we purchased the property in 2018, as the superintendent said, we, for a number of years on and off, had leased the old school building there for some of our programs. We had kindergarten there one year when we were doing renovations. We've had our community programs there. We've had the alternative program there. So when the church expressed interest in selling that parcel because they were consolidating parishes, the board at the time thought it would be an ideal piece of property because the school building gave us potential uses, but also it joins our landlocked high school fields. And as you know, our varsity baseball field is not able to fit in at our high school, so it's at a junior high school. Right now, our varsity tennis program is at a junior high school. So this property gives a number of possible uses, and the board a year ago was on the verge of putting up a proposition to the voters for combining this property, put a connecting road through from East Henrietta Road back behind our stadium into our west parking lot, putting in artificial fields. The board last year decided it was imprudent, given the significant economic turbulence at the time. It would be imprudent to dedicate money to those processes, because the other option, if we had to reduce our budget, if the state aid reductions that were threatened were realized, we would have had to redirect our funding for our capital reserves into preserving our programs, which means the biggest piece of our capital is to maintain infrastructure. And then we do try to build up reserves to enable significant things. So that's a long-winded way of getting into this piece of it. This is a small piece of what we'll be bringing to the board next week, actually, alternatives, what we can do with the Good Shepherd property, or next board meeting, rather. As the superintendent said, when the property was purchased, the long-term vision was to, in some form, renovate and utilize the church as a community/educational site. It wasn't big enough, it isn't big enough to host school concerts, so it would be limited use. And our proposal last year included $1.7 million to renovate the building, to bring it up into compliance with building codes that we operate as an educational unit. So our building code is dictated by the state education department, not by the local town code. And as the superintendent mentioned, SED told us in no way could they ever give us a C of O for the farmhouse. There was in no way that it met school district conditions for a C of O. in discussions with the town, there was a lot of interest from the town in preserving the farmhouse because it's an historic building. One of our schools is named after it. Our Burger School is named after the owner, the original owner of that property. And they thought they could utilize the church for many more community events than we could. So the town has been looking at it, and just last night, the town council approved moving forward, if the school board agrees, where we would sell just the church building and the farmhouse back to or sell it to the town. Basically, we would sell it for $1, but then they incur the liability for bringing the house up to code and bringing the church up to code. And fortunately for them, it'll take them less money than it would cost us. And we're also giving them a little bit of land, so there's enough room for a parking lot between the two buildings and behind the farmhouse for 16 cars, because we did not want to encumber right now, we'll certainly share our parking that we have, but we did not want to encumber future boards and restrict what we could do with parking. The town had asked for part of the deed to have access to our parking. Instead, we gave them a little bit of piece of land, and in the handout that you saw, you'll see the boundary that we drew, which gives them parking for 16 spaces. The town is fully aware of some of the potential uses for our property. The board's intent has always been to work as a partner with the town. We'd certainly share parking, but we don't want to restrict our ability to do what the board feels best for educational needs. So we thought it would be a win-win for the community if the town took the church building, which the board had always expressed interest in preserving, as well as the farmhouse, which the district could not use. They can use it for a lot more community programs. They can renovate at a lower cost than we can. So those structures are available for the town, but yet the district retains most of the land as well as the old Good Shepherd school there for our community-based programs, and then we'll be bringing recommendations at the next board meeting on some of the potential development for that property. So what this resolution is asking is for the board to authorize the superintendent to finalize the purchase details with the town, and we would be able to then, next board meeting, bring that back if the board would like to move forward with it. Any questions?
Long time coming.
Yes, it is a long time coming. So in the documents that were given to us, under the sale of the Good Shepherd Church and Farmhouse, at the bottom, there was a resolution resolved. Are you looking for that to be approved this evening?
Yes.
I want to make sure
If you're interested.
we're talking about the same resolution.
Yep.
Okay. So that resolution reads, resolved that the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District authorizes the superintendent of schools to conduct negotiations with the town of Henrietta for sale of the old farmhouse and original church building on the Good Shepherd site located on East Henrietta Road. And that's how it reads. So I would take a motion to approve. Mr. O'Brien. A second, Mrs. LaPlaca. Any further discussion regarding that? We've had plenty at our table regarding that, but, all right.
Before we go there, again, I just want to reiterate that we're looking for approval in concept. We would be coming back for final approval next week. That would also give us more of an opportunity to let the community know that this is in the works. We could put something out broadly before you act on it finally. And I also just want to say that I think that this is, one of those collaborative endeavors that certainly requires consideration because it represents a mutual benefit to the district and the town.
So I do see hands, so can I take their questions before I finish the vote? Okay. All right, so I have Mrs. Sheila Buck come up to the microphone, and then we'll have Millie.
Sheila Buck, President, Rush-Henrietta Employees Association Teachers Chapter. I understand that you will be taking this up at a future board meeting, and so I'm happy to see the collaboration between the district and the town. That is fabulous. What I would like to know is if, when you're discussing this project at a future meeting, which is what I heard said it would be discussed in length, I wanted to know if the project has changed, because I remember specifically a year ago, a little more than a year ago, when this plan was brought before the Board of Education, that it was specifically said that there would not be lights that would be installed on the athletic field. So I will be looking forward to seeing if that change has been made. Thank you.
Good evening, Millie Safranek, Henrietta Town Council, resident at Pinnacle Road and parent of 2 current children in the district. I just want to say as the town of Henrietta, we really appreciate the opportunity to preserve the 1800 farmhouse that belonged to the Berger family, which was a major family here in the town of Henrietta. As I'm sure you're all aware, once we lose a historic site, we cannot ever recover that. So being able to give the town an opportunity to hold on to that and preserve that for future generations is of major importance, not just to those of us here now, but to those that are coming. You're probably aware there's not very many historic sites that are left in Henrietta. So whenever we have an opportunity to hold on to those and preserve those for future generations, I think it does contribute to the basic education of all of the children and residents here in Henrietta. And we have a lot of great plans for those, so I'm sure that you'll hear some great things coming out from the Historic Site Committee and from the town historian for some potential uses for both of those locations. So thank you.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. All right.
Mrs. Straczynski says she's really good for the sales, too.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to approve the superintendent to conduct those negotiations. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. We did discuss tabling the policies to another meeting, the next meeting, so this brings us to the superintendent's report.
There was one item that was submitted as a written report. That is the extracurricular activities report for the 3rd quarter. Are there any questions on that item?
No.
And let's get to brass tacks, which is reopening, the conversation that probably most of you are interested in. I sent out an e-news last night to staff and to families, updating them on what transpired on Friday, just after we issued our plan for fully reopening K-12 for 4-day-a-week instruction. That next day, that Friday at 5:15, the state issued updated guidance, which made it a bit more difficult to reopen on several levels. So we, spent the weekend figuring out what it all meant and how it was essentially going to impact our plan. And we were, we had a superintendent's meeting virtually on Sunday to unpack it, to, look at what's gonna help schools to reopen, what's gonna hinder, questions that were still sort of lingering based on the way that the guidance was worded. We had some meetings yesterday. We met with our principals and some of our directors, had conversations with other superintendents in the area. I actually had a chance to do some visits to buildings to take a look at the physical space given the new guidance. And then we met as an area superintendent's group with Dr. Mendoza today. And so the short of it is, we are planning to move forward with a K-6 reopening on the 19th, given the new guidance. This means that students from cohorts 1 and 2 who are in the hybrid model would attend school on Mondays and Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays, with Wednesday remaining a day that's virtual. Unfortunately, the state guidance is not going to allow for a 7/12 return just yet. And what's really impacting that here in Monroe County is the fact that essentially the entire county is in what's categorized as a red zone. And so until infection rates go down, we can't bring students back. Having said that, our plan is to continue to work toward that. We are having some conversation with the local Department of Health to look at a more nuanced approach, which would look at different parts of the county, however they do that, whether it's through zip codes or townships or school districts, so that if you have secondary schools in an area where the infection rate is significantly lower than it is in other parts of the county, that those schools would potentially have an opportunity to reopen faster than if the entire county sits in the red zone. So that's something that the local Department of Health said that they were considering, and they were working on some different models, and we're going to continue to move in that direction. But we're going to have to evaluate the status of a secondary reopening on a week-by-week basis, essentially. But we are planning to move forward with a K-6 reopening starting Monday, April 18th. So I want to sort of walk through what that means, because we have less than a week to kind of finalize the details. So tomorrow we are going to be moving forward with our community forum, which will be virtual. It will be done essentially in the same manner in which we held the reopening community forums over the summer. So it will be live streamed. I will be there along with our cabinet members to field questions. 4:30 to 5:30 will be designated for staff members. They will be able to submit questions to us through the live chat. And that will be managed by Community Relations. And then we will be starting with families, community members at 6 o'clock that evening, and that will go to 7, and we will use the same format. Thursday the 15th and Friday the 16th are designated as Asynchronous Days K-12. And the reason for that, as I mentioned at our last meeting, is that we want to give employees an opportunity to transition, to focus on instructional planning, but to also ready the physical spaces and environments for this transition. And I received a lot of emails last night, but some people asked me, if you're not going to reopen 7/12, then why are teachers being given that time? Why isn't this a day of attendance for students? And the answer is this: because we're still planning on trying to reopen 7/12. And if you're going to ask that of not only teachers, but all of the employees that work in this district to make this transition, then I agree that we do need time to, for people to plan and prepare. And that was one of the top-rated thoughts that came out of our thought exchange as we were asking for feedback. So that needs to happen, because the plan is that eventually we'll be able, hopefully, to bring back our secondary students as well, even if it takes a little bit longer. And there's always the possibility that it doesn't happen, but nevertheless, we want to, like I said, we're planning on putting a good faith effort forward, and we want to make sure that the people are given ample time to prepare for that transition. So those 2 days will be Asynchronous Days, K-12, Thursday, Friday, and then we're going to rock and roll on April 19th. I do want to point out that we have some programs that have been 4 days a week. throughout the course of the year. Special education programs, the alternative program that's housed in this building has been 4 days. So in those cases where we're not looking to make a transition, those will be days of attendance for those programs. And we will not be going asynchronous. So those teachers, those employees that support those specific programs, and the kids will be reporting on that day. And I'm going to specify that later, assuming that everybody is supportive of our plan to reopen, then I would communicate that more broadly to staff and families this evening. And that's really the gist of what we want to communicate tonight to you. And if you're supportive, then we will move forward and we'll communicate it throughout the school community. So we're, I do want to say this, whatever you decide is that we're very appreciative of your patience and your flexibility and your support, not only of the budget and some of the other things that were presented tonight, but also of our efforts to try and get kids back to school. I know in a lot of cases it's been one step forward and 2 steps back, and as frustrating as it's been for our community and as frustrating as it's probably been for you, we share in that frustration. But I do want to say, I know that I speak for our team when I say how appreciative we are of the support that you have given us during a really, really difficult year. So that's it. I open it up for questions and comments.
I have a
Nikki?
question.
Yes.
First, I want to say thank you. I know everything has been released at like 5, 6 o'clock on a Friday, so your team is constantly working weekends to trying to figure out what the regulations are. So thank you for all of your hard work to get through all this. The first question is, I know in the regulations it stated about lunches,
Yeah.
where they're saying that 6 feet now all of a sudden, if masks are off and you're eating. I know all year we've been great with 3 feet and barriers. Is the county okaying that plan?
So we received a legal opinion at the state level and also through other firms that because we have been implementing barriers at 3 feet within our cafeteria, that we would be able to continue using those same measures. We are not, we didn't have to submit an amended plan, so we're able to continue with those same measures going forward.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Question.
Yes.
Okay. What is like PE and gym going to look like? Are they going to combine classes, or how are they going to handle numbers, like with the class?
At the elementary level?
Elementary level, yeah.
Well, you probably read that the distancing in PE and in music is reduced from 12 feet to 6 feet,
Okay.
Which will help us in terms of managing specials. Generally speaking, we'll utilize the gymnasium, and also now that the weather is starting to break, we'll utilize outdoor spaces, but we will probably not be, we'll be trying to keep classes separated to the extent possible to maintain cohorting measures. And as far as, I think most schools at the elementary level, this is an area where we did give some flexibility because schools are different depending on the physical space that they have access to. So, after our meeting yesterday, we decided we would give some flexibility to schools based on, the space that they had available in terms of either phys ed is pretty universal, but in terms of the way that they service students in music and art, either allowing them to go to the music and art room or service them in their room, depending on the physical space that's available. But generally speaking, at the elementary level, we'll try to maintain those cohorting measures to the extent possible, recognizing that at the secondary level, it's a bit harder to do that.
And at the elementary level, I've done this, being in the city, I've gotten students, and then I've gotten 6 more, like once we were able to do the busing and whatnot. And getting kids, it's kind of like starting scratch. Like, are they going to have the emotional support? Are they going to have like the social workers? Are social workers coming in to talk to classes and to ease the anxiety of coming back? Is that also looked?
That has been talked about, and I'm going to have Nurlan speak to some of the specifics around that.
Yeah, I think overall, as you know, this year has been a different year, and every time there's a transition, that is the conversation at the forefront. As a matter of fact, we have a student management meeting with all of the administrators, and that's one of the things that we're going to discuss again with transition. From all of the community building circles we have been doing, teachers getting the time to be able, again, putting that at the forefront, saying it's like the start of the new school year again. And you have cohorts that are coming together for the first time. So we are aware of that and definitely have to take the time to be able to build that community again.
Great, thank you. And starting the we're into our 4th quarter now. Junior high and high school, they're going to be starting with APs and when's the date where you're going to say, okay, we're just going to keep things as is? Because this is causing a lot of anxiety for the high school students, especially those who are trying to balance work and APs and any exams. So when is the district going to say, you know what, it's May 15th?
Yeah, I think once you get beyond that first week in May, Jen, I think that, you have to question whether or not it's worth bringing kids back. One of the things I talked to with Dr. Schaefer, the high school principal, recognizing that, there are different challenges to trying to get the older kids back, is looking at targeted ways that we could bring students back to campus. Like I said, I'm not going to give up hope on bringing students back for 4-day week instruction 7-12. It's a bit more challenging given the rates that we're seeing in the community. But I think, once you get beyond that first week in May, then I think, you have to question whether or not it's worth it. And having said that, ultimately, you could make the decision as a board that we just want to remain 7-12 hybrid for the rest of the year. Or you can leave it open-ended, where we say, we're going to continue to try to do this, but if it gets to a point where, it's beyond that first week or so in May, and it doesn't look like we can make it happen, then we say this is going to be the plan for the rest of the year.
And with all the releases, what is graduation? Have you guys thought about what scenario we're going to do for graduation?
Yeah, that you probably saw, they released some additional guidance, which was very similar to what they put out before, in terms of, the thresholds for hosting an indoor event versus outdoor. I think some of the differences that are noteworthy are that initially they were saying, for example, anything beyond 200 people outdoors, the district has to test everybody that's coming to the event, whereas now there's language that suggests that you can present a vaccination card or a recent negative test, and you don't have to the organization doesn't have to handle all the testing. They also release some information regarding percentage, looking at the capacity of an area and then establishing certain thresholds. I don't want to try and recite them because I'll get the numbers wrong, but if you're going to have a certain amount of people in an open space, that you would only be able to utilize a certain percentage of the capacity. Right. But generally speaking, I don't think that our plan has to be altered all that much. As we discussed, we're still looking at holding an outdoor graduation ceremony within our own stadium. Last year we did, it worked beautifully, but we had like 12 ceremonies in 2 days, as you remember, so we're trying to look at reducing the number of ceremonies to 6, and we just need to make sure that, look at the number of tickets that students would have and just make sure that between the number of graduates and the number of family members that we would be inviting, that it lines up with the new guidance that just came out. That might have come out yesterday. Did that come out yesterday? So just making sure that everything lines up as far as the numbers go. But looking at it just on its face, I think that we're still on the right track.
Okay, thank you.
I'm surprised you didn't ask this question. One of the targeted approaches that you mentioned at the high school, would that possibly mean bringing like the senior class back so they would have that opportunity to be together as a cohort before they graduate? Sorry, James, you can't hear me, can you?
I'm leaning in, I'm good.
Thank you.
Looking more, I think, yes, but also looking at certain events and opportunities that would sort of bring people together in that way and still allow us to stay within the existing guidelines.
Okay.
But that's definitely one of the things that we're looking at is, putting a special focus on seniors. That's a group that probably has, it's been hard for everybody, but I think as far as our students go, it's been extremely hard for them because they missed the last half of their junior year and, essentially have had a very different senior experience as well. So we're committed to making sure that we do right by them and end the year in a way that's meaningful for them.
And we're still planning a junior ball and a junior prom and senior ball?
We're working on that, but we're focused on, especially, again, the senior aspect.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And so you're looking for an endorsement from us right now, or which direction to
I
go
would
in?
like to be able to move forward with communicating with families after the board meeting.
I think it would be wonderful to get our K-6 back.
Absolutely.
Yeah, K-6.
Yep.
And
You didn't want to say anything?
No, I'm good.
What do you, K-6? With the hopes of maybe 7/12, but with a cutoff date? And Mrs. Straczynski, you have anything? Okay.
She's good.
So it sounds like we all endorse getting our K-6, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Millie Safranek, Pinnacle Road resident and parent of two children in the district. So I really appreciate all of the work that you're putting into this. I know that things keep changing and there's so many balls up in the air. As a parent, I've got a lot of balls at home myself. I set up daycare and then I had to cancel my daycare, and now I was wondering whether I needed to set up daycare again, so I get it. But I think one of the things that has concerned me the most is there seems to be an indication from the district that you are going to end the testing of students in school. If that's possible to continue, I strongly feel that that's something that should continue, especially given the county statistics coming out about children under the age of 18 testing positive for COVID. And given that we don't fully understand what the neurological impacts on children are of COVID, and that we're seeing, some of those effects that even though children might not get as sick as adults, they are having some neurological symptoms, sometimes for months afterwards. I think it would be wise to prevent as much spread as possible.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Millie, because that's a conversation that I've also had with Sheila as well. we're the only school district currently testing right now. I mean, I think actually not even most. Every other district stopped testing months ago. So we've been testing students, and we've provided testing at the transportation center for staff all along. But having said that, the county's sort of taking a different approach at this point for a couple different reasons. And before I get into that, I will say this. We are down to probably testing in schools on a monthly basis, probably about 10% of our student population. And that is because many of the parents who initially gave consent to test, initially when it was required, because they wanted schools to stay open, once that requirement was gone and we were still testing, said, if it's not going to be required, then, I don't want my child tested. So really, we're only testing a small pool of students, and it's, you're testing the same students over and over, so it's really not giving us good, clean data as far as what's actually happening from a health and safety standpoint within our student population. Having said that, if it was required, which it isn't under the new guidance, and it doesn't look like it's going to be supported locally, we can accommodate that very easily. The protocols are in place. We have the resources to do it. But as I said before, the county is taking a different approach for a couple different reasons. One is because they don't have the same stockpile of tests that they had when school districts that were in certain zones were required to test. But the bigger reason is because regardless of the community infection rate, the rates have remained incredibly low in schools throughout the pandemic. And so the focus, and I, like I said, it's not a big deal for us to continue to test students. It would just be a matter of going out and getting more parents to participate in order to make it meaningful, but the protocols and the processes are in place already. But I've spoken with the local Department of Health twice now and asked them specifically if, because it's, I think the wording that's used in the new guidance is recommended when possible or something to that effect, if we should be testing. And at this point, the answer has been no, because they are really focused on contact tracing in schools and working collaboratively with us when we have a positive case to determine who needs to be quarantined, who isn't. And I think that process will be even tighter as we look to bring more kids back to school. And as I said before, they're kind of shifting gears and looking at the vaccination piece, getting the adults that are working within the organization vaccinated, and then looking at a protocol for getting students vaccinated, which you're already starting to see the older kids have access. So we're more than willing to do it, but right now locally it isn't recommended, and I just asked that question of our public health officials today. So we're willing to do it, but right now locally it's not being supported or recommended for those reasons. Sorry, that was a really long-winded explanation. Yeah, well, we have been, but our intention is for this week to be the last week that we test students, and then we'll continue making tests available to staff members who want it. But unless there's, we've committed to working with the local DOH, and unless there's a different approach on their part, then yeah, we would be discontinuing our testing program.
All right. So it seems like everybody is supporting the K through 6, 7 through 12 if we can, with a cutoff date, and keep up the targeted approach. We'd like to really help our seniors celebrate, I'm not sure what, to give them something good to go off on is more what I guess, it's been very hard on them. So, all right, does that give you everything that you need?
That gives me everything that I need, and that concludes the superintendent's report. Thank you.
Oh, I just have one comment. I've had more people come to me about masking.
Yeah.
So if you can just make sure in your notification tonight that masking is still required. They just said that in your long email that nothing was mentioned, and they're, people are jumping now that it's 3 feet instead of 6 feet, and
Okay, yeah, we'll make sure that we clarify that.
thank you.
Okay, thanks for the feedback. All right, that brings us to board member reports. First up is labor relations.
So unfortunately, I had an emergent issue at work that day at noon on the 24th, so I was unable to attend or get May to attend in my stead, but I forwarded the minutes around. And
I had a chance to read it. It looked like it was a good,
Yep.
good session, so thank you. The next one is the Equity Inclusion Steering Committee. We met on March 24th. We used to start out with our, circles, but they're so eager to get into our work that we started right into it. The folks from the U of R gave us some examples of completed goals as we're trying to tidy up our action plans. So as soon as they did that, we got right into that work. We're able to report out on those 4 different groups that I mentioned the last time. So we're getting closer to finalizing information for a report back to the board. So it's great work. There's 50 people. It's just amazing the work that's coming out of that group, how collaborative they are, and the great thought that's going into it. So it's going to help push us forward in our efforts. The next thing is the Multicultural Parent Advisory Council, which was the 25th. It was a busy week for me. And at MPAC, it was really great. We start out with an opening circle there. Will Hall leads us with that. But our presentation was supporting and monitoring language acquisition for English language learners, and Jamie Scripps presented. I got to tell you, that was a fantastic presentation. And, sometimes I think things we get at MPAC we should be having here at the board table. It was just a lot of great information about what's going on with our English language learners, and so it's something to think about, just the things that are going on, the differentiation, the things that they're looking at, the home life, the social emotional pieces, the different ways that they're communicating. Some great pieces came up with, people trying to register their kids for kindergarten, and just because this really was very interesting. Their name was a particular name. You could tell there was a cultural difference. And when they asked if the child, spoke English, and the insistence that, "Well, you sure they speak English? You sure they speak English at home?" So it kind of brought into the equality and equity pieces of, how we treat folks coming into the district. So that was a really interesting piece of the conversation of, just judging people by their names and how they look. And that's part of our important piece of our work that we're with the equity team. So, that's something that we might want to consider how that's being supported and monitored. It was really good. Jamie's amazing. Next up is Monroe County Legislative. I did send you the minutes. Just a lot of good conversation. One of the pieces that we're going to be trying to work on is meeting with our representatives again. And, they were really appreciative of us sharing the information of the things that we need to see in our different districts. So this will be an opportunity not only for the state folks, but we're going to have some meetings with our federal representatives to thank them for their efforts to provide us the dollars that we need, but also not to ease up. What are some of the other things that are of concern for us that are going to affect us down the road? I mentioned to Andy, and one of the things was talking about, transportation, not just our lack of bus drivers, but some of the distances we drive students to charter schools. So if there are things that you think that we should be still advocating for with our representatives, please let me know. For our next meeting, that'll be part of our conversation, that we're, if we don't ask, there's no hope of anything changing. And the newest group from the state, I gotta tell you, they're advocating for education right now in a big way. So now's the time to keep working with them to see what other things we can accomplish for our kids. So that was the legislative. And next up would be, was the BAC Community Budget Forum. Go ahead.
Several of us were there. So Bo and Andy went through the budget presentation handout, and during that process, they alluded to the changes coming with the news of this more state aid less than 24 hours before the presentation. That was it.
All right. Next would be the Henrietta Youth Development Advisory Committee. Is that usually May?
It's May, yeah.
Yeah, and she's not with us, so she can let us know later.
And the district wellness was Ms. Straczynski, and since she's coughing or whatnot, she said it was a great meeting and it was very informative, and she emailed us all the notes. So check your emails.
Perfect, perfect. Is there anything else to address this evening? Then I will call for the recap. Thank you, Jennifer, for taking those notes to help out tonight.
All agenda items have passed. We did adopt the new budget with the changes. We will be reopening. Yay! Come on. Come on, people. Looking for a little audience participation.
Can you tell she's a teacher?
It's a tough crowd here. Man, I see what you mean, Mr. Wright. Okay, we are excited to welcome back our kids, K to 6, on April 19th. They will be having an asynchronous learning day on the 15th and 16th. That is for everyone K to 12, in hopes that our 7 to 12 teachers will be able to prepare. There will be a community forum next week. Staff time is 4:30 to 5:30, and community...
Tomorrow.
I'm sorry, tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow, Thursday. No, Wednesday?
Wednesday,
sorry. It's a long week. Okay. Wednesday, they will have the staff from 4:30 to 5:30, and then community from 6 to 7. Any changes in the budget will be directed to Travis for communications, correct, Mr. Whitmore?
Correct, yes.
And we put in our parking lot to take a look at the Director of Arts, to take a look at establishing the position again and looking at the expenses. And I believe that is it for tonight.
We will come back with information in the next meeting about the purchase of Good Shepherd. And also, we will have a follow-up, is it next time, for projected plans for the Good Shepherd property.
Okay.
All right. Between us, we did it, Jennifer.
Got it.
Thank you. All right, if there is nothing else, I would take a motion to adjourn the meeting. I have Mr. O'Brien there and Mrs. LaPlaca. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.